What happens when a Hollywood legend loses her cool on live television? In just 20 seconds, one of the most shocking moments in daytime TV history unfolded right before millions of viewers. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to our channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. Hit that subscribe button now, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Last night's episode of The View became the talk of the entire entertainment world after what started as a simple conversation between Joy Behar and Cher turned into an absolute nightmare. The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what happened next left everyone in complete shock. Cher walked onto the View set looking confident and ready to chat, wearing one of her signature bold outfits that sparkled under the studio lights. The audience cheered loudly as she took her seat at the table, waving and smiling at the crowd like she'd done 1,000 times before on talk shows. The other hosts welcomed her warmly, complimenting her outfit and thanking her for coming on the show. But there was something in the air that felt different right from the start, a tension that seemed to hover over the table even as everyone exchanged pleasantries. Joy Behar started off friendly enough, making small talk about Cher's latest projects and asking how she'd been doing. Cher responded with stories and jokes, getting laughs from the audience and smiles from the other hosts. Everything seemed perfectly fine for those first few minutes, just another celebrity appearance on a popular talk show. Then Joy shifted gears. She brought up Cher's recent comments on social media regarding politics and current events, specifically some tweets that had gotten a lot of attention and sparked heated debates online. It seemed like a normal question at first, the kind of thing hosts ask famous guests all the time when they've been vocal about important issues. Cher smiled and started answering, sharing her thoughts about what she believed was important for people to understand and why she felt compelled to speak out. But Joy wasn't satisfied with Cher's answer. She pressed harder, her tone changing from curious to challenging. She suggested that maybe Cher didn't really understand the full picture of what she was talking about, implying that the situation was more complicated than Cher was making it seem. You could see Cher's smile fade just a little bit as Joy continued pushing, asking more pointed questions that felt less like genuine curiosity and more like attempts to prove Cher wrong. Cher tried to elaborate on her position, giving specific examples of why she felt the way she did. She spoke about things she'd researched, people she'd talked to, and experiences that had shaped her understanding. But every time she tried to make a point, Joy would jump in with a counter-argument or a skeptical comment, not really letting Cher finish her complete thought. Cher responded calmly at first, explaining her position with examples and reasons why she felt the way she did. She tried to keep things friendly, even laughing a bit, to ease the tension that was starting to build at the table. But Joy kept interrupting her, talking over Cher's words and shaking her head like she disagreed with everything the music icon was saying. It was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't going to be a friendly exchange of ideas. The other hosts at the table started looking uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and glancing at each other nervously. You could see them wondering if they should jump in or let this play out, unsure of how to handle the growing tension between their colleague and their famous guest. The audience in the studio grew quieter too, sensing that something was shifting from a normal conversation to something much more intense and potentially explosive. Joy leaned forward in her chair and said something that really got under Cher's skin. She questioned whether celebrities like Cher should even be speaking about serious topics, suggesting that maybe she should just stick to singing and acting instead of weighing in on complex issues. She said it with a slight smile, like she was being playful, but the words carried a sharp edge that cut deep. The comment hung in the air for a moment, and you could practically see the fire starting to burn in Cher's eyes. Cher took a deep breath before responding. Her voice changed, getting lower and more serious, as she told Joy that she had every right to share her opinions just like anyone else in this country. She pointed out that she'd been around for decades, seen a lot of changes, and experienced things that gave her plenty of reason to speak up about what mattered to her. She mentioned specific events from her career, times when she'd witnessed injustice firsthand, moments that had shaped her worldview and given her perspective that couldn't be dismissed so easily. The friendly atmosphere that had existed at the beginning of the interview had completely disappeared now, replaced by a palpable tension that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable and on edge. Joy fired back immediately, not missing a beat, her voice getting louder and more insistent with each word. She started listing reasons why she thought Cher's viewpoint was wrong, using examples and statistics and pointing her finger across the table for emphasis to drive home her points. She challenged Cher's facts, questioned her sources, and suggested that maybe Cher was just repeating things she'd heard on social media or from friends, without really understanding the full complexity of the issues at hand. She implied that Cher's opinions were surface level and not well thought out. Cher didn't back down one bit. Instead, she started matching Joy's energy exactly, her own voice rising as she defended her position with passion and conviction, citing her own research and conversations with experts. The conversation spiraled quickly, out of control. What had been a disagreement was now turning into a full-blown argument right there on live television, with cameras capturing every single moment for posterity. Joy accused Cher of being out of touch with everyday people, suggesting that living in mansions and flying on private jets made it impossible to understand the real struggles that regular folks faced every day. She painted a picture of Cher as someone living in an ivory tower, disconnected from reality. That comment hit Cher like a slap in the face, and you could see her entire demeanor shift in an instant, from defensive to genuinely offended. Cher's expression hardened immediately. Her jaw set tight, and her eyes narrowed as she prepared her response, taking a moment to collect her thoughts before unleashing them. She shot back that Joy had no idea what she'd been through in her life, where she came from, or what she'd overcome to get where she was today. She reminded Joy in a sharp, cutting voice that she didn't grow up rich and famous in some privileged household, that she'd worked incredibly hard for everything she had, starting from absolutely nothing, and that her success didn't erase her ability to care about others or understand important issues facing regular people. She talked about growing up poor in California, about struggling to make ends meet early in her career, about facing discrimination and obstacles that Joy couldn't even begin to imagine. She spoke about the years of grinding work, the rejection, the struggle to be taken seriously as both an artist and a woman in a male-dominated industry. Joy wouldn't let it go, refusing to give Cher even an inch of ground. She kept pushing, kept challenging, kept interrupting, every single time Cher tried to make her point complete. She would cut in mid-sentence with objections or contradictions, not giving Cher the space or time to fully express her thoughts or make her complete argument. It was becoming less about the actual topic they were discussing and more about who could dominate the conversation, who could get the last word, who could come out on top. The other hosts attempted multiple times to steer the conversation somewhere else, to cool things down before they got even worse, suggesting they talk about Cher's music or her upcoming projects. But it was too late. The damage was done, and both women were locked in a battle neither seemed willing to lose or walk away from. Their pride was on the line now, and neither Joy nor Cher was the type of person who backed down easily from a fight. Cher's face flushed red with anger as Joy made another dismissive comment, waving her hand in the air like Cher's words didn't matter at all, like they were meaningless noise that could just be brushed aside. You could see Cher's jaw clench tight, her eyes narrow into slits, and her whole body tense up like a coiled spring. She'd clearly reached her absolute limit with being talked down to and interrupted constantly. This was no longer about the original topic they'd been discussing. This had become personal, a battle of wills and respect between two strong-willed women who refused to back down. The turning point came when Joy laughed at something Cher said. It wasn't a friendly laugh or an amused chuckle at a joke. It was a mocking laugh, the kind that tells someone you think they're ridiculous and that you don't take them seriously at all. The sound of it echoed through the studio, cutting through the tension like a knife. Cher stopped talking mid-sentence and just stared at Joy with an expression of pure disbelief, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Nobody said anything. The studio fell completely silent, except for the sound of cameras still rolling and capturing every single moment of this unfolding disaster. Cher slowly shook her head from side to side, her lips pressed into a thin line, clearly trying with everything she had to control the anger that was boiling up inside her like a volcano, ready to explode. Then Cher spoke, and her voice was ice cold, each word delivered with precision and controlled fury. She told Joy that she'd come on the show expecting a respectful conversation between adults, not to be treated like she was stupid or didn't know what she was talking about. She said she'd been in this business longer than some of Joy's colleagues had been alive, and she deserved better than this kind of treatment. She'd earned respect through decades of work and success, and she wasn't going to sit there and let anyone strip that away from her. Joy tried to defend herself, her voice getting defensive as she said she was just doing her job as a host by asking tough questions and pushing back on things she disagreed with. She claimed that this was what good journalism looked like, that it was her responsibility to challenge guests and not just let them say whatever they wanted without scrutiny. But Cher wasn't having it, not even a little bit. She said there was a huge difference between asking tough questions and being straight up rude and disrespectful to someone sitting right across from you. The argument escalated even further, reaching new heights of intensity. Joy's voice got sharp and cutting as she told Cher that maybe if she couldn't handle being challenged on her views, she shouldn't come on talk shows where hosts are supposed to ask difficult questions. She suggested that Cher was being overly sensitive and that she expected everyone to just agree with everything she said without question. Cher fired back immediately that she could handle challenges just fine. She'd been handling them her entire career, but what she couldn't and wouldn't handle was being disrespected by someone who should absolutely know better. Back and forth they went, voices rising higher and higher, talking over each other, neither one willing to back down or apologize or admit they might have gone too far. The other hosts looked absolutely mortified, frozen in their seats as this explosive confrontation played out right next to them. One of them tried again to change the subject, suggesting they take a commercial break or move on to a lighter topic. But both Joy and Cher ignored her completely, too locked into their battle to pay attention to anyone else. Cher brought up how Joy had been interrupting her constantly since the conversation started, not letting her finish a single thought without cutting in with disagreements or dismissive comments. She counted on her fingers all the times Joy had talked over her, making it clear that this wasn't just about one comment but about a pattern of disrespectful behavior throughout the entire interview. Joy shot back that Cher was being too sensitive and reading too much into normal talk show banter, that this was just how these conversations went, and Cher should have known that. That response only made Cher angrier, her face getting even redder. The music legend leaned forward across the table, pointing her finger directly at Joy, and said something that made the entire studio gasp out loud. She told Joy that she was acting like a bully, using her position as host to talk down to guests and make them feel small on national television. She said it wasn't the first time she'd heard about Joy treating people this way, that she'd heard stories from other celebrities and industry people about similar experiences, and now she was seeing it firsthand and understanding exactly what they'd been talking about. Joy's face turned bright red, her cheeks flushing with what looked like a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She clearly didn't like being called out like this on live television, especially not by someone as famous and respected as Cher. She defended herself again, her voice getting more defensive and sharp with each word, saying she was nothing like a bully, and that Cher was being completely dramatic and unfair with her accusations. She said she treated all her guests with respect, and that Cher was twisting everything around to make herself look like a victim. Cher laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh at all. It was the kind of bitter laugh someone makes when they can't believe what they're hearing. when they're so frustrated that all they can do is laugh at the absurdity of the situation. She said that calling someone out for bad behavior wasn't being dramatic, it was being honest and direct. She told Joy that maybe she needed to take a long, hard look in the mirror and think seriously about how she treats people, both on camera and off. She suggested that maybe Joy had been doing this for so long that she didn't even realize anymore when she was being disrespectful and condescending. That comment pushed Joy completely over the edge. She raised her voice even louder than before, practically shouting now, telling Cher that she didn't need life lessons or advice from someone who didn't even want to have a real conversation about the issues. She accused Cher of coming on the show just to promote herself and her opinions without being willing to defend them properly. Cher shot back just as loudly that she'd tried to have a real conversation. She'd really tried, but Joy made it impossible by being hostile and argumentative from the very beginning. From the first question out of her mouth, the studio audience didn't know what to do with themselves. Some people looked completely shocked, their hands covering their mouths as they watched this train wreck unfold. Others looked uncomfortable, wishing they were anywhere else but witnessing this ugly confrontation. And a few seemed almost excited to be seeing this dramatic moment in person, knowing they'd have an incredible story to tell their friends and family. The cameras kept rolling throughout all of it, capturing every heated exchange, every angry expression, every moment of this complete breakdown in civility and professional behavior. One of the other hosts finally managed to get a word in edgewise, practically begging both Joy and Cher to take a breath and calm down before things got even worse. She suggested they could all use a moment to reset and start over with a fresh topic, but it was way too late for that kind of intervention. The damage had been done, feelings had been deeply hurt on both sides, and both women were too fired up, too angry, too invested in this fight to just drop it and move on like nothing had happened. Joy made another cutting remark about Cher's intelligence and understanding of complex issues, suggesting that maybe she should leave the serious discussions to people who actually studied these topics. That was it. That was the final straw that broke everything. Cher stood up from her seat abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and everyone in the studio knew exactly what was about to happen next. Joy looked genuinely surprised for the first time, her eyes widening as she asked where Cher thought she was going in the middle of the interview. Cher looked directly at Joy with eyes full of fury and said she was done, that she didn't need to sit there one more second and be disrespected and insulted on national television in front of millions of viewers. She said she'd never been treated this poorly on any talk show in her entire long career, and she wasn't about to start accepting it now just because Joy thought she could get away with it. Joy told her to sit back down immediately, that they weren't finished with the interview and there were still more topics to cover. She tried to sound authoritative and in control, but there was an edge of panic in her voice now. But Cher shook her head firmly and said, "Oh yes, they absolutely were finished. Completely done." She started removing her microphone with shaking hands, her fingers fumbling slightly with the clip, from the intensity of her anger, as she unclipped it from her outfit and set it down on the table with a loud thunk. Joy's voice got demanding and almost desperate, telling Cher that walking off the show in the middle of an interview was unprofessional and childish behavior unbecoming of someone of her stature. Cher turned and looked at Joy one more time, her eyes blazing with an anger that seemed to burn right through the television screen. She said in a voice dripping with contempt that what was truly unprofessional was how Joy had treated her from the moment she sat down in that chair, and she wasn't going to waste another single second of her valuable time trying to have a conversation with someone who clearly had zero respect for her as a person or as an artist. The other hosts tried one last desperate time to salvage the situation, asking Cher to please reconsider and stay so they could work things out. They promised they could move to a different topic, that they could have a better conversation about something else, but Cher had made up her mind completely. She thanked the other hosts sincerely for trying their best to keep things civil and respectful, making it absolutely clear that her anger was directed specifically at Joy and not at anyone else sitting at that panel. She told them she appreciated their efforts to mediate and that she had nothing against any of them personally. Joy made one final comment, something sharp and cutting about Cher not being able to handle the heat of a real discussion, suggesting she was running away because she couldn't defend her positions. That was the absolute last straw. Cher turned back toward Joy with fire in her eyes and said something that made everyone in the studio gasp even louder than before, their collective intake of breath audible throughout the space. She told Joy in no uncertain terms that she could handle heat just fine. She'd been handling it for 50 damn years. But she absolutely refused to sit there and let someone treat her like crap just for entertainment value and ratings. The profanity hung heavy in the air, shocking everyone because you rarely hear language like that on daytime television. Cher turned away again, this time for good, with no hesitation in her movements. She walked across the stage with her head held high and her shoulders back, refusing to look defeated or ashamed, her heels clicking loudly against the floor in the otherwise completely silent studio. The cameras followed her every single step as she headed toward the exit, capturing the historic moment of a Hollywood legend walking off one of daytime TV's biggest shows. Joy called out something else, one more attempt at a parting shot, but Cher didn't turn around or acknowledge it in any way. She kept walking forward with purpose and determination, her expression set in stone, clearly completely done with the entire terrible situation. The audience still didn't know whether they should clap, stay quiet, gasp again, or what the appropriate response was to witnessing something this dramatic and unprecedented. As Cher reached the edge of the stage, she paused for just a brief second. For one moment, it looked like she might turn around and say something else, deliver one final statement or come back. But instead, she just shook her head slightly, almost sadly, and continued walking without looking back, disappearing behind the curtain and out of the studio, leaving chaos and shock in her wake. The View hosts sat at their table in absolutely stunned silence. Joy looked angry and defensive, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face still flushed red. The other hosts looked absolutely shocked and horrified at what had just happened right beside them, their faces showing a mix of surprise, embarrassment, disbelief, and concern about what this would mean for the show. The cameras captured it all, every uncomfortable second of the aftermath, every awkward glance between the remaining hosts, every moment of the audience's shocked reactions. This wasn't how anyone expected the interview to go when Cher first walked out onto that stage. What should have been a fun, engaging conversation with a legendary entertainer had turned into one of the most dramatic, explosive, and talked about moments in daytime television history, the kind of moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Cher was gone, having walked off The View after a confrontation that escalated from simple tension to disagreement to full-blown argument to dramatic exit in a matter of minutes that felt both endless and incredibly fast. The studio audience remained mostly silent, still processing what they'd just witnessed with their own eyes. Some people had their phones out already, fingers flying across screens as they texted friends or posted on social media about the unbelievable, unprecedented scene they'd just seen unfold in real time. Joy tried to continue with the show, attempting to move on to the next segment like a professional, but you could tell she was completely rattled by what had just happened. Her usual confident demeanor, the self-assured way she normally commanded the table, had been shaken to its core by the confrontation and by Cher's dramatic decision to walk off rather than continue engaging in what had become a toxic, disrespectful conversation that benefited no one. The remaining time on the show felt incredibly awkward and tense, like everyone was walking on eggshells. Nobody could really focus on anything else they were supposed to be discussing because everyone, from the hosts to the crew to the audience, was still thinking about what had just happened. The explosive argument between Joy Behar and Cher would be replayed over and over on news shows and social media, analyzed and discussed and debated for days and probably weeks to come. This wasn't just another celebrity interview that went slightly wrong or got a little uncomfortable. This was a complete and total meltdown of professional courtesy and basic respect, broadcast live for millions of people across the country to see in their homes. Cher had made an incredibly powerful statement by refusing to stay in a situation where she felt disrespected and diminished, walking away with her dignity intact even as the controversy exploded around her like fireworks.